It was past 10 at night when the rain started, a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the streetlights into hazy gold circles on the wet pavement. The old Honda Civic rattled slightly as it rolled down Maple Street, its muffler long overdue for a fix. Inside, the driver kept both hands on the wheel, eyes tired but alert, glancing now and then at the sleeping boy in the passenger seat. His head was tilted against the window, earbuds dangling from one ear, chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. She'd picked him up from his after-school tutoring an hour late, again, because her second shift at the home care agency had run over. She didn't mind the extra hours. Rent was due in 3 days and the fridge was nearly empty. She'd been working double shifts for weeks ever since the clinic cut back her hours. Every morning before dawn, she made sure her son had clean clothes, a packed lunch, and his homework signed. Every night she came home bone-tired, feet aching, but still managed to ask about his day, check his math problems, and tuck him in. She didn't have much, just a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a landlord who never fixed the leaky faucet, but she gave him everything she could: stability, love, a chance. The taillight had been flickering for days. She knew it. She'd even taped a piece of red plastic over it, hoping to buy time until payday. But tonight the tape must have come loose. She didn't see the patrol car behind her at first. Then the flash of red and blue lit up her rearview mirror like a warning flare. Her stomach dropped. She pulled over slowly, heart thudding. She turned off the engine, hands still on the wheel, and took a breath. "It's okay," she whispered to herself. "Just a light. You've got your license, your registration. Be calm." She reached for the glove compartment to get her papers. But before she could open it, a flashlight beam cut through the driver's side window, blinding her. "Step out of the vehicle," a voice barked. She blinked, shielding her eyes. "Officer, I was just..." "Now, hands where I can see them." She glanced at her son. He stirred, confused, pulling out one earbud. "Mom?" "It's all right, baby," she said softly, forcing calm into her voice. "Just stay put." She opened the door slowly, stepping onto the wet curb in her worn sneakers. Raindrops dotted her thin jacket. 2 officers stood there, one tall, broad-shouldered, the other younger, wiry. The tall one held the flashlight under his chin like he was in a horror movie, casting sharp shadows across his face. "License and registration," he said, not looking at her, scanning the car instead. "I was getting it," she said, nodding toward the glove box. "My son's asleep. I didn't want to startle him." "Don't move," the younger officer snapped, stepping closer. "Keep your hands visible." She froze. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "Then why'd you hesitate?" the tall one asked, finally meeting her eyes. His voice was flat, cold. "I didn't hesitate. I was being careful. My kid's in there." The younger officer walked around to the passenger side, peering in at the boy who now sat upright, wide awake, clutching his backpack like a shield. "Who's this?" the officer asked through the window. "My son," she said quickly. "He's 14. He's been at tutoring. He's tired." The tall officer stepped closer, looming over her. "You live around here?" "Yes, 2 blocks down." "Got any warrants?" "No." "Drugs in the car?" "No." Of course not, he didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes, the suspicion, the assumption. She'd seen that look before. Not because she'd ever done anything illegal, but because of the way she looked, the neighborhood she lived in, the kind of car she drove. She knew the script. Stay polite. Don't raise your voice. Don't make sudden moves. But no matter how careful she was, sometimes it didn't matter. "Open the trunk," he ordered. "Why? It's just my groceries in my work bag." "Open it now." She sighed, defeated, and walked to the back of the car. Her fingers fumbled with the latch. It was sticky from the rain. When it finally popped open, she stepped aside. The younger officer shined his light inside, rummaging through her canvas tote, knocking over a bag of apples, spilling her lunchbox onto the wet pavement. "Hey," she said, instinctively stepping forward. "That's my food for tomorrow. Don't move," he shouted, spinning around, hand on his belt. She stopped cold. "I wasn't going to touch you. Put your hands behind your back." "What? Why?" "You just assaulted an officer." "I didn't touch you." But he was already pulling out handcuffs. The tall one grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back with such force that her shoulder screamed in pain. The cold metal clicked around her wrists before she could even process what was happening. "Mom!" her son cried, throwing open the car door and running toward her. "Leave her alone." "Get back in the car," the younger officer yelled, stepping between them. No, she didn't do anything, the boy shouted, tears mixing with rain on his face. Sir, you're under arrest for resisting arrest and obstruction, the tall officer said, shoving her toward the patrol car. This is insane, she yelled, stumbling on the curb. I have a job. I have a child. You can't just... You'll get your call, he said, opening the back door of the cruiser. Now get in. She turned her head, searching for her son. He stood there, soaked, shaking, eyes locked on hers, terrified, helpless. She wanted to tell him it would be okay, but the words stuck in her throat. Because right then she wasn't sure they were true. They shoved her into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched as the younger officer approached her son, speaking in a low voice she couldn't hear. Then he guided the boy toward the patrol car, opened the front passenger door, and helped him inside. Not roughly, but not gently either. Just efficiently, like he was handling a package, not a child. The drive to the station was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional sob from the front seat. She kept her eyes on her son's reflection in the rearview mirror. He kept wiping his face with his sleeve, trying to be brave. She wanted to reach out, hold his hand, tell him she was sorry, but her hands were cuffed behind her back, and the plexiglass divider between them might as well have been a wall. At the precinct, things moved fast and impersonally. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and led to a holding cell that smelled of bleach and sweat. Her son was taken to a separate room. A social worker arrived within the hour, clipboard in hand, explaining that since she was being held overnight and there was no other guardian listed, he'd be placed in temporary emergency foster care. No, she said, voice breaking. Please, his aunt lives 20 minutes away. I can call her. We'll look into it, the social worker said, not unkindly but without urgency. But procedures must be followed, she begged. She pleaded. She gave the aunt's number 3 times. But by midnight, her son was gone, driven away in a county vehicle, looking back at her through the glass door until he disappeared around the corner. Alone in the cell, she sat on the hard metal bench, knees pulled to her chest. The cold seeped through her clothes. Her shoulder throbbed where the officer had yanked her arm. She replayed every second of the stop, searching for what she'd done wrong. Had she moved too fast? Spoken too loud? Was it the red tape on her taillight? The fact that she lived in this part of town? That she was a woman raising a boy alone? She didn't cry, not yet. Crying wouldn't get her out of here. Crying wouldn't bring her son back tonight. So she sat in the dark, listening to the distant clang of doors and muffled voices, and made a promise to herself. She would get through this. For him, morning came gray and damp. A guard brought her a paper cup of bitter coffee and a stale granola bar. Around 8 a.m., a public defender, a young woman with tired eyes and a wrinkled blazer, appeared outside her cell. Your name's on the list for arraignment today, she said. They're dropping the obstruction charge, but resisting arrest is sticking. Bail set at $500. I don't have $500, she said quietly. I barely have $50. The lawyer nodded like she'd heard it 100 times. I'll ask the judge for release on your own recognizance. You've got no record, right? No, never even a speeding ticket. Good. And your son? He's with Child Services. They took him last night. The lawyer's expression softened just a little. I'll mention that to the judge. It might help. 2 hours later, standing before a bored-looking judge in a cramped courtroom, she was released, on the condition she return for her next court date and not leave the county. No apology, no acknowledgement of the bruise on her shoulder. Just a stamped paper and a shove toward the exit. She walked out into the weak morning sun, shivering in her damp clothes. Her car was gone, towed. Her phone was dead. Her son was somewhere she couldn't reach, and her boss had probably already given her shift to someone else. But she kept walking, block after block, past bodegas, laundromats, bus stops filled with people heading to jobs that wouldn't wait for them. She didn't know how she'd fix this. But she knew one thing, she couldn't fall apart, not now. Not ever, because somewhere out there her son was waiting for her to come get him, and she would. No matter what it took, the rain had stopped. A single bird sang from a telephone wire. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and kept moving forward. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. She sat near the back, clutching the release papers like a lifeline, her eyes fixed on the passing storefronts but seeing nothing. Her clothes still smelled like the jail, bleach and stale air, and her shoulder ached. With every bump in the road, she hadn't slept. Hadn't eaten anything real since yesterday's lunch, now probably rotting in the trunk of her impounded car. But none of that mattered as much as the silence in her chest where her son's voice should have been. When she finally reached the apartment complex, she climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. The door creaked open to an empty living room. His shoes weren't by the mat. His hoodie wasn't slung over the couch. The TV was off. The quiet was suffocating. She dropped onto the couch and just sat there staring at the wall. Then the phone rang. It was her sister, the boy's aunt, voice tight with worry. They called me this morning. Said they tried to reach me last night but couldn't verify my address fast enough. They've placed him in emergency foster care. Just for a few days, they said. Until you're stable. She paused. What happened, sis? She told her. Every detail. The tail light. The flashlight in her eyes. The way they twisted her arms. The look on her son's face as they drove him away. Her voice cracked only once when she described him crying in the front seat of the patrol car. Her sister was quiet for a long time. You gotta file a complaint, she finally said. This isn't right. I know, she whispered. But what if it makes things worse? What could be worse than them taking your kid over a broken light? She didn't have an answer. The next morning, she went to the police department's main station, not the precinct where she'd been booked, but the central office downtown. She wore her best blouse, the one she saved for parent-teacher conferences, and carried a folder with printed screenshots of the city's complaint form, her release papers, and a note from her doctor about the bruising on her shoulder. The lobby was bright and sterile, with plastic chairs and a bored-looking clerk behind bulletproof glass. She filled out the form carefully, checking boxes for excessive force, false arrest, and emotional distress. When she handed it through the slot, the clerk barely glanced at it. Someone will review it, he said, stamping it without looking up. Could take 6 to 8 weeks. 6 weeks? She asked. My son's in foster care right now. That's not our department, he said flatly. You'll need to talk to family services about that. She left feeling smaller than when she'd walked in. Back home, she called Child Protective Services. She was transferred 4 times, put on hold for 20 minutes, and finally spoke to a caseworker who sounded like she'd had a long week. Ma'am, your case is flagged as pending parental stability assessment, the woman said in a practiced, neutral tone. Until the criminal charges are resolved and we confirm a safe home environment, reunification can't proceed. But the charges are bogus, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't do anything. Regardless, the arrest creates a risk factor. We're required to follow protocol. She hung up and sat on the floor of her kitchen, back against the cabinets, knees pulled to her chest. The apartment felt too big and too empty all at once. She missed the sound of his sneakers thudding down the hall, missed his laugh when he watched funny videos, missed the way he'd sometimes bring her a glass of water without being asked. 2 days passed. She called her job and was told her shifts had been reassigned. We can't hold positions indefinitely, her supervisor said gently. But you're welcome to reapply when things settle. Things. That's what they called it. Things. As if her life hadn't been upended by a 5-minute traffic stop, she pawned her grandmother's silver locket, the only thing she had left from her to pay the $175 towing fee and another $90 for storage. When she finally got her car back, the apples were moldy, her lunchbox was missing, and someone had rifled through her glove compartment. Her registration was gone. Her son's school permission slip for the field trip next week. Gone. She sat in the driver's seat and cried for the first time since the arrest. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that fell onto the steering wheel. She cried for the injustice, for the fear in her son's eyes, for the way the world kept turning like nothing had happened, even though her whole life had shattered. That afternoon, she went to the public library. She needed internet. Her phone plan had been cut off after she missed a payment, and she needed answers. She searched for lawyers who took police misconduct cases. Most required upfront fees she didn't have. One nonprofit offered free consultations, but their next opening was in 3 weeks. She scrolled through news articles, found a few local stories about similar incidents. People pulled over for broken lights, expired tags, suspicious behavior that turned out to be nothing. In every case, the department issued a statement saying officers followed procedure. No names, No consequences, just silence. She thought about going to the local newspaper. But who would care about one more single mom in a city full of struggles? She wasn't a politician, didn't have a social media following, wasn't even sure she could trust herself to tell the story without breaking down. Then she remembered the body cam footage. During her release hearing, the judge had mentioned it. Body cam shows partial interaction, the court clerk had noted in the file. If the video existed, it could prove she never resisted, that she'd been calm, that her son had done nothing wrong. She filed a public records request online that night. It took 20 minutes to fill out. She hit submit and waited. A week went by. No response. She called the police department's records division. Requests can take up to 30 business days, a recorded voice said. 30 days. Her son had already been gone 10. She visited him at the foster home, a small, tidy house on the edge of town. The foster mother was kind, soft-spoken, with photos of other kids on the fridge. Her son ran to her the moment she walked in, burying his face in her shoulder. "I missed you so much," he whispered. "I missed you too, baby," she said, holding him tight, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. "I'm trying. I really am." They sat on the porch for an hour, talking about school, his math test, the new comic book he'd borrowed from the library. He didn't ask about the arrest, didn't mention the police, but she saw it in his eyes. The new wariness, the way he flinched when a siren passed in the distance. On the bus ride back, she made a decision. She would go to Internal Affairs herself, in person, no forms, no waiting. She'd stand outside their office if she had to. The next morning, she dressed again in her best clothes, printed out everything she had, and took the bus downtown. The Internal Affairs office was on the 3rd floor of a nondescript building. A receptionist asked her to sign in and wait. 2 hours later, a detective finally called her name. He was older, with tired eyes and a wedding ring. He led her to a small interview room with a table and 2 chairs. She told him everything, showed him the doctor's note, explained how her son was in foster care because of a mistake that wasn't even hers. She kept her voice calm, respectful, pleading but not angry. The detective listened, nodded occasionally, took notes. When she finished, he leaned back. "I appreciate you coming in," he said. "But based on the initial report, the officers stated you became combative when asked to exit the vehicle. They said you refused to show ID." "That's not true," she said, heart pounding. "I was getting my ID. I told them my son was asleep. I never raised my voice." "Body cam footage supports their version," he said evenly. Her stomach dropped. "What? But I saw the court notes. It said partial interaction." He shrugged. "The footage from that night shows you arguing, stepping toward the officer and refusing commands. Standard procedure was followed." "That's impossible," she whispered. "I didn't do any of that." "Maybe the stress of the situation affected your memory," he suggested gently. "It happens." She left the building feeling like she'd been erased. Like her truth didn't matter because it didn't match theirs. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The neighbors argued through the thin walls. A dog barked somewhere down the street. She thought about calling the news again, about posting online, but fear held her back. What if they came after her again? What if they said she was lying? What if they used it against her in family court? She'd seen how the system worked. It protected its own, and people like her, working, tired, alone, were easy to ignore. A few days later, the body cam request came back. Not the video, just a letter. Due to technical malfunction, it read, "The body-worn camera footage from the referenced incident is unavailable." She read it 3 times. Then she crumpled it and threw it across the room. Her son called that evening from the foster home. "Mom," he said quietly, "Mrs. Lopez said I might have to stay here until summer if the court stuff isn't fixed." Summer was 3 months away. She closed her eyes. "I'm doing everything I can." "I know," he said. "I believe you." Those words nearly broke her, because he still trusted her. Even when the whole world acted like she was guilty just for existing, she started looking for second-hand jobs, cleaning houses, folding laundry at a laundromat, anything cash in hand. She needed money for a lawyer, for bus fare, for groceries so she could prove to CPS that her home was stable. She took on extra hours at a diner, washing dishes until her hands were raw. But every time she thought she was making progress, another wall appeared. The public defender stopped returning her calls. The court date got pushed back. The foster home said visits would be. One rainy afternoon, she sat on the bus, head against the window, watching the city blur past. An elderly woman sat beside her, humming softly. After a while, the woman turned and said, "You look like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders, dear." She almost laughed. "Feels like it," the woman patted her hand. "Sometimes the only thing you can do is keep showing up. Even when it hurts," she nodded, tears welling up. "I just want my son back." "You will," the woman said firmly. "As long as you don't give up." Those words stayed with her. That night, she wrote a letter to the mayor's office. Not a legal complaint, not a demand. Just a story. Her story. She described the stop, the arrest, the fear in her son's eyes, the empty apartment, the body cam that malfunctioned. She didn't ask for money or revenge. She just asked for someone to see her. To see them. She mailed it the next day, not really expecting anything. Mayors were busy people. They dealt with budgets and parades and big city problems, not the broken taillight of a tired mom, but she mailed it anyway. Because what else was left? Days turned into weeks. She kept working, kept visiting her son, kept showing up at court dates and CPS meetings. She learned to speak in their language, compliance, risk assessment, case plan, even though it felt like wearing someone else's skin. And then, one evening, as she was washing dishes in the diner's back room, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello?" she said, wiping soapy hands on her apron. "Hi, is this the person who wrote the letter about the traffic stop on Maple Street?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes," she said, heart suddenly racing. "This is Clara from the mayor's office. We received your letter and we'd like to talk." She froze, dish rag dripping in her hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker, not of hope exactly, but of possibility. Like maybe, just maybe, someone had finally heard her. She took a breath. "Okay," she said. "I'm listening." He hadn't meant to do it. Not really. It just happened one night when the silence in the foster home got too loud. He'd been staying with Mrs. Ruiz for almost 3 weeks now. She was kind, always made sure he had clean clothes, hot meals, and a quiet place to do his homework. But it wasn't home. Home was the smell of his mom's coffee in the morning, the way she hummed off-key while folding laundry, the sound of her voice saying goodnight, love, through his bedroom door. Here, everything was too neat, too quiet, too careful. That night, after finishing his science project on renewable energy, he sat on the edge of his borrowed bed, staring at the phone in his hand. His mom had given it to him before the arrest, her old one with a cracked screen but still working. She'd said, "Call me anytime, even if it's 3 a.m. But since he'd been placed here, their calls were short, supervised, and always ending with her voice tight with worry. He missed her so much it hurt in his chest. He scrolled through his contacts. Just her number. That was it. No friends' numbers. He hadn't felt like talking to anyone since that night. School had been awkward. Kids whispered. Teachers gave him sad looks. He kept his head down, did his work, and walked straight home. Then he remembered something from civics class. His teacher had spent a whole week talking about how regular people could make a difference. "Your voice matters," she'd said. "Even if you're young, even if you're scared." She'd shown them how to write letters to elected officials, how to attend city council meetings, how to call the mayor's office if something felt wrong in your neighborhood. At the time, it had sounded like textbook stuff. Nice ideas that didn't really work in real life, but now it felt like the only thing left. He opened his browser and typed in the city's official website, scrolled past news about potholes and park renovations until he found a page titled, "Contact the Mayor." There it was, a phone number, an email, even a form. But the phone number had a note. "For urgent community concerns, call the 24-hour hotline. Urgent." Was this urgent? His mom was being treated like a criminal for doing nothing wrong. He was living with a stranger because of it. Yeah, that felt urgent. His hands shook as he dialed. It was almost 9 p.m. He figured no one would answer, or if they did, it'd be a recording. But on the third ring, a woman's voice said, "Mayor's office, community response line. How can I help you?" He froze, his mouth went dry. For a second, he thought about hanging up. Then he took a breath. "Hi," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "My name is... I'm calling about my mom." There was a pause. "Okay, sweetheart. Take your time. What happened to your mom?" And just like that, the words came tumbling out. He told her about the broken taillight, about the officers yelling, about watching them handcuff his mom while he sat in the car, too scared to move. He told her how they took her away, how he spent the night in a cold room at the police station before being driven to a foster home. He told her how his mom lost her job, how they wouldn't give her the body cam video, how no one believed her. I know she didn't do anything wrong," he said, voice cracking. "She works all the time. She never even got a parking ticket, and now they say she's not stable enough to have me back. But it's not her fault. It's theirs." He stopped, breathless, tears hot in his eyes. He expected the woman to say something polite but vague. "We'll look into it," or, "Thank you for your call." He braced himself for another dead end. Instead, she said, "Can you tell me your name?" "And your mom's name?" He hesitated. "Do I have to? What if it makes things worse?" "I promise you this call is confidential," she said gently. "And if what you're saying is true and I believe you, then the mayor needs to know." "Especially now." "Why especially now?" he asked. "There's been a lot of concern in the city about how police treat families," she said. "The mayor started a new program last month, Youth Voices, to make sure kids like you are heard. Your call just got flagged as high priority." He didn't know what that meant, but it sounded important. He gave her their names, their address, the date of the arrest, the officers' badge numbers if he remembered them right. He even described the car, the street, the rain that night. When he finished, the woman said, "Thank you. You were very brave to call. Someone will follow up with your mom soon, maybe even tomorrow." He hung up, heart pounding. He felt a little lighter but also scared. What if they didn't believe him? What if they thought he was exaggerating? He was just a kid who listened to kids. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning at school, he kept checking his phone between classes. Nothing. At lunch, he sat alone, picking at his sandwich, wondering if he'd imagined the whole call. Then, during fifth period, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mom. "Someone from the mayor's office just called me. They said you called them?" His face burned. He texted back, "Yeah, I didn't know what else to do." Her reply came fast. "You did the right thing. I'm so proud of you." He smiled for the first time in weeks. But the real surprise came that evening. Mrs. Ruiz got a call just after dinner. She listened, nodded, and hung up with a look of quiet amazement. "That was a caseworker from Family Services," she told him. "They're moving your reunification review up and they said the mayor's office has requested your case be fast-tracked." He didn't know what fast-tracked meant, but it sounded like hope. Later that night, his mom called. Her voice was different, stronger, clearer, like a weight had been lifted. "They're sending someone to review the police report," she said, "and they're trying to recover the full body cam footage from a backup server. The woman from the mayor's office said your call made all the difference. I couldn't watch you go through this alone," he said. "You're not just my son," she told him, voice thick with emotion. "You're my hero." He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt like a kid who missed his mom and wanted things to be fair. Over the next few days, small changes started happening. A city investigator visited the foster home to interview him, not in a scary way, but like he was a witness to something important. They asked gentle questions, wrote everything down, and thanked him for his honesty. His mom got a call from a lawyer, someone from a civil rights group who'd been contacted by the mayor's team. "Pro bono," she told him. "That means free. She's going to help fight the charges." Even his school counselor pulled him aside one day. "I heard what you did," she said quietly. "Standing up for your family takes real courage. If you ever need to talk, my door's open." For the first time since that rainy night, he didn't feel invisible, but the best moment came on a Saturday morning. His mom showed up at the foster home, not for a scheduled visit, but with a social worker and a signed release form. "They're letting me take you home," she said, tears in her eyes. "Just for the weekend at first, but it's a start." He ran to her and she wrapped him in the tightest hug he'd ever felt. She smelled like laundry soap and coffee and home. On the bus ride back, they sat side by side, shoulders touching. He didn't say much. Neither did she. They just held hands like they were making up for lost time. Back at the apartment, Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The same posters on the wall, the same stack of library books on his desk, the same slightly lopsided lamp in the living room, but it felt different now, brighter, warmer. His mom made pancakes, his favorite, even though it was noon. They ate at the kitchen table, laughing about how burnt the edges were, talking about nothing and everything. Later, as he unpacked his weekend bag, he found a folded piece of paper in his pocket. It was the printout he'd made of the mayor's contact page. He stared at it for a long time. One phone call. That's all it took. He hadn't shouted, hadn't posted angry videos, hadn't marched in the streets, though he respected people who did. He'd just picked up the phone, told the truth, and trusted that someone might listen, and someone had. That night, as he lay in his own bed, listening to the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of his mom washing dishes, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, peace. He knew it wasn't over. The court date was still coming. The officers hadn't been punished yet, but for the first time, he believed things could actually change, not because of power or money or fame, but because one kid spoke up and someone in charge chose to listen. Fell asleep thinking about what he'd say in his next civics class. Maybe he'd tell them, "Don't wait to be an adult to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is one honest sentence and the courage to say it out loud." Outside, the city lights glowed softly against the night sky. Somewhere a siren wailed in the distance, but this time it didn't scare him, because now he knew. His voice mattered. The call came in just after lunch. Mayor Evelyn Rhodes was sitting at her desk, reviewing a draft of the city's new police accountability proposal, when her chief of staff knocked lightly and stepped inside. "You need to hear this," she said, holding out a printed transcript. "It's from the Youth Voices hotline. A 14-year-old boy called last night about his mom." The mayor set down her pen and took the paper. She read it slowly, her expression shifting from professional interest to quiet anger. The boy's words were raw, honest, and painfully specific. The rain, the broken taillight, the way his mother's hands shook when they cuffed her, the silence of the foster home afterward. There was no exaggeration, no theatrics, just a child describing what he saw, what he felt, and what he feared. When she finished, she looked up. Why wasn't this escalated immediately? It was flagged, but it got buried under routine complaints, her chief admitted. "We've had over 200 calls this month. Most are about potholes or noise complaints. This one, it slipped through." The mayor stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city bustled. Delivery trucks, students heading to class, a street vendor setting up his cart. Normal life. But behind that normalcy, she knew, were hundreds of stories like this one. People who'd been failed by the very systems meant to protect them. "Find everything on this case," she said, turning back. "Arrest report, body cam logs, internal affairs file, CPS records. And get me the full unedited footage, not the summary they gave the court. If it's on a backup server, pull it. If it's missing, find out who deleted it and why." Her team moved fast. Within hours, they'd located the original body cam files. The department had claimed the footage malfunctioned, but a tech specialist from the city's IT division discovered the full video had been automatically saved to a secondary cloud archive, a standard backup that officers couldn't access or alter. It had never been reviewed. That evening, the mayor watched the footage alone in her office. There it was, the Honda pulling over, the mother stepping out calmly, the boy asleep in the passenger seat, the officer's flashlight blinding her, her asking about her son. Then nothing aggressive, no sudden moves, no raised voice, just compliance, until the moment the officer grabbed her arm without warning, shoved her against the hood, and began shouting commands she'd already been following. The mayor paused the video. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't a mistake. This was abuse of power, and it had torn a family apart over a $5 taillight bulb. The next morning, she called a closed-door meeting with the police chief, the city attorney, and the head of the Civilian Oversight Board. She played the video without commentary. When it ended, the room was silent. "This can't stand," she said finally. "These officers violated department policy, state law, and basic human decency. I want them placed on administrative leave by noon. And I want a full independent investigation, not run by internal affairs but by the Oversight Board with public updates." The police chief shifted uncomfortably. Mayor, with all due respect, the officers reported she was uncooperative. The video contradicts that, she cut in, voice firm but calm. And a child lost his home because of it. If we don't act now, we're telling every family in this city that their rights mean nothing if an officer decides otherwise. By 11 a.m., the 2 officers were removed from duty. By 2 p.m., the mayor's office contacted the mother directly, not through a form letter, but with a personal call from the mayor herself. "I saw what happened," the mayor said gently. "And I'm so sorry you and your son went through that. We're going to make it right." The woman on the other end of the line didn't cry. She just whispered, "Thank you for seeing us." 2 days later, the mayor held a press conference in City Hall's main atrium. Reporters filled the room, cameras flashing. She stood at the podium, the body cam footage playing on a large screen behind her. "Last month," she began, "a working mother was arrested during a routine traffic stop for a broken taillight. She complied with every instruction. She asked only that her sleeping son not be frightened. Instead, she was handcuffed, jailed, and separated from her child. Her car was impounded. Her job was jeopardized. And when she sought justice, she was told the evidence didn't exist. She paused, letting the weight of it sink in. But the truth doesn't disappear just because someone wishes it would. Thanks to the courage of her 14-year-old son, who called this office believing his voice might matter, we recovered the full footage. And what it shows is unacceptable." She announced the officer's suspension, the independent investigation, and the immediate dismissal of all charges against the mother. Then she went further. "Effective today," she said, "we are launching 3 reforms. First, all body cam footage from any arrest involving a minor must be reviewed by an independent civilian within 48 hours. Second, no child will be placed in emergency foster care solely due to a parent's arrest unless there is clear evidence of danger in the home. And third, we are creating a rapid response legal aid team to support families caught in these situations, so no one has to navigate this system alone." The room erupted in questions, but the mayor held up a hand. "This isn't about one case. It's about a pattern, and patterns only change when we choose to break them." After the press conference, national news picked up the story, not as a scandal, but as a rare example of accountability working the way it should. Headlines read, "Mayor acts after teen's call exposes police misconduct," and "One phone call, one family, one step toward justice." But the real impact wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments afterward. The mother received a call from the district attorney's office the next day. "We're dropping all charges," the prosecutor said, "and we're expunging the arrest from your record." Her son was officially returned to her full-time. The foster care case was closed with a note. Reunification successful. No risk factors identified. The city's legal aid team helped her file a formal complaint with the state's Civil Rights Division. They also connected her with a job placement program that found her a new position, one with better hours and health benefits. And then, unexpectedly, the mayor invited them to City Hall. Not for a photo op, but for a private meeting. They sat in a sunlit conference room, just the 3 of them, mother, son, and mayor. No cameras, no speeches. "I wanted to meet you both," the mayor said, "because you reminded me why I do this work. It's easy to get lost in budgets and politics, but justice starts with people, with families, with kids who still believe the system can be fair if someone just listens." The boy looked down, shy. "I didn't think anyone would care." "I cared," she said, "and now because of you, hundreds of other families might be protected." Before they left, the mayor handed the boy a small envelope. Inside was a certificate, Youth Civic Leadership Recognition, signed by the city council. On the back, she'd written in her own handwriting, "Never stop speaking up. The world needs your voice." That night, back in their apartment, the mother made spaghetti, his favorite. They ate at the kitchen table, laughing about how he'd burned the garlic bread again. After dinner, he showed her the certificate. She traced the words with her finger, then looked at him. "You know what's crazy?" she said. "All you did was tell the truth. And that was enough. It shouldn't have taken so much," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "It shouldn't have, but it had." And because he'd acted, because he'd believed his voice mattered, something had shifted. Not just for them, but for others who'd been too afraid to speak. In the weeks that followed, the Oversight Board held public hearings. Dozens of residents came forward with similar stories. People pulled over for minor violations, treated like suspects, humiliated in front of their children. The video of the mother's arrest became a reference point in those testimonies. It happened to her, they'd say. It could have been me. The two officers were eventually fired after the investigation confirmed they'd falsified their report and failed to follow de-escalation protocols. They didn't face criminal charges. Prosecutors said it was hard to prove intent, but they lost their badges, their pensions, and their careers. In a system that rarely held officers accountable, it was as close to justice as the city had seen in years. The mayor used the momentum to push through broader reforms. Mandatory crisis intervention training for all officers, a civilian-led complaint review panel with subpoena power, and a city fund to reimburse families for towing fees, legal costs, and lost wages due to wrongful arrests. None of it erased what happened. But it meant it might not happen again, or at least not as easily. For the mother and her son, life slowly returned to something like normal. She started her new job. He joined the school's debate club, inspired by how words could create change. They still flinched at sirens sometimes, still kept the apartment lights low at night, but the fear no longer lived in every corner. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to her. "Do you think things are really changing?" She thought for a moment. "I don't know if the whole system's fixed," she said. "But I know we're not invisible anymore, and that's something." He nodded, leaning his head on her shoulder. Outside, the city hummed with life. Imperfect, messy, but trying. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, it was trying in the right direction. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting soft stripes across the table where 2 mugs of coffee sat steaming. It was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's radio playing oldies. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the swirl of cream fade into brown. Her son sat across from her, scrolling through his phone, one hand absently tapping a rhythm on the tabletop. He looked lighter these days, less tense around the eyes, like he could finally breathe. It had been 6 months since that night. The rain, the flashing lights, the cold metal of the handcuffs. 6 months since her world had cracked open and then, slowly, stitched itself back together with stronger thread. The charges were gone. The arrest record wiped clean. Her job was steady now, with benefits and a supervisor who actually asked how her son was doing. They'd even gotten the taillight fixed. Properly this time, not with red tape, but with a new bulb from the auto parts store down the street. But the real change wasn't in the paperwork or the paycheck. It was in the way they moved through the world now, less afraid, more aware, and strangely more hopeful. Her son had started speaking up in ways she never expected. He'd joined his school's civic engagement club after the mayor's office invited him to speak at a youth forum. At first, he'd been nervous, standing in front of city officials, teachers, even reporters, but he'd done it. He talked about how one phone call changed everything, not because he was special, but because the system finally chose to listen. After that, kids at school started coming to him with their own problems, a landlord ignoring repairs, a teacher making unfair accusations, a friend scared to report harassment. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew where to point them. The city's youth hotline, the legal aid office, the community center downtown. He became the kid people trusted. She watched him grow into that role with quiet pride, not because he was famous or powerful, but because he cared, and because he believed fairness was worth fighting for. One Saturday morning, as they walked to the farmer's market, he turned to her. "They asked me to help design the new Youth Voices brochure," he said, kicking a pebble down the sidewalk. "You know, the one the mayor's office hands out at schools." "Oh yeah?" she said, smiling. "What did you put in it?" "I wrote a line at the bottom," he said, a little shyly. "Your voice is your power. Use it." She reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "That's good. Really good." They didn't talk about the arrest much anymore. It wasn't that they'd forgotten. It was just no longer the center of their story. It had become a chapter, not the whole book. Still, reminders popped up now and then, like the day a city worker knocked on their door with an envelope. Inside was a check, not huge, but enough to cover 2 months' rent. It was from the new Family Restoration Fund, created after the reforms passed. The note read, "To support families impacted by wrongful enforcement actions. No strings attached, She cried when she saw it, not out of sadness but relief. For the first time in years, she could imagine saving for something other than emergencies, maybe a used laptop for her son, or a weekend trip to the coast. Then there were the quieter gestures. The local librarian who slipped her son extra books just because, the bus driver who always waved when they boarded, the neighbor who left a pot of soup on their doorstep after hearing about everything they'd been through. Small kindnesses that said, "We see you. We're glad you're okay." The city itself felt different, too. At the police station downtown, there was now a bright sign near the entrance. Civilian Oversight Office, your complaint, your rights. Flyers in multiple languages explained how to file a report, who to contact, and what to expect. Officers wore new patches on their uniforms, tiny blue ribbons symbolizing completion of de-escalation training. It wasn't perfect. There were still complaints, still mistrust in some neighborhoods, but people were talking, really talking about what safety could look like beyond force and fear. She'd even been invited to join a community advisory board that met monthly with police leadership. At first, she'd hesitated. "I don't know anything about policy," she told the organizer. "You know what it feels like to be on the other side of a badge," they replied. "That's exactly what we need," so she went. Sat in that room with former officers, pastors, teachers, and other parents who'd lived through similar moments. They didn't always agree, but they listened. And slowly they built something. New guidelines for traffic stops involving minors, a requirement that officers explain why someone is being detained, a pilot program where social workers, not cops, respond to mental health calls. It wasn't revolution. It was repair. Slow, careful human repair. Back at home, life settled into a new rhythm. Weeknights meant homework at the kitchen table, her grading care plans while he wrestled with algebra. Fridays were movie nights, popcorn, blankets, and whatever was streaming. Sundays were for laundry, grocery lists, and long walks in the park where he'd point out birds and she'd tell him stories about her own childhood. One evening, as she folded towels, the phone rang. It was a local news station. They were doing a follow-up piece on the reforms and wanted to know if she'd be willing to share an update. Just a short interview. No pressure. She looked at her son, who was watching from the couch. Eyes wide with curiosity. "Do you mind?" she asked him. He shrugged, but she saw the flicker of pride. "Go for it, Mom," so she said yes. The interview was simple. No dramatic music. No reenactments. Just her sitting in their living room talking about what had changed, not just for them but for others. "I'm not an activist," she said, looking straight into the camera. "I'm just a mom who wanted to come home to her kid. But sometimes standing up for your own family helps other families too. That's what I've learned." After it aired, messages poured in, not from strangers with opinions, but from people who'd been through something similar. A single dad in another city who'd been pulled over for an expired registration. A grandmother whose grandson was questioned at school over a misunderstanding. They thanked her, said her story gave them courage to speak up. She replied to everyone. Now, on this quiet morning as she sipped her coffee and watched her son scroll through his phone, the phone rang again. She glanced at the caller ID. Unknown number. For a split second, her stomach tightened. Old fears never fully disappear. They just learn to sit quietly in the corner. But she took a breath and answered. "Hello? Hi, is this the mom from the Maple Street case?" A young voice asked, nervous but clear. "Yes," she said gently. "Who's this?" "My name's Leo. I'm 15. I live in Oak Ridge. Something happened to my sister last week. Police stopped her for jaywalking and they got really aggressive. She's scared to file a complaint. But I saw your interview, and I thought, maybe you could tell me what to do." She looked at her son, who'd stopped scrolling and was watching her with quiet understanding. She smiled. "Of course I can," she said. "First, take a deep breath. You're doing the right thing by calling." And just like that, the circle widened. Later that afternoon, she and her son sat at the library, helping Leo draft his first complaint letter. He was shy at first, but her son, now the veteran of one city-changing phone call, walked him through it step by step. "Start with what you saw," he said. "Just the facts. Don't worry about sounding perfect. They need to hear the truth, not a speech." She watched them, 2 boys, different ages, different neighborhoods, bound by the same need for fairness, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was how change really happened. Not in grand speeches or viral videos, but in quiet rooms over library tables, one honest conversation at a time. That night, as they walked home under streetlights just beginning to flicker on, her son slipped his hand into hers, a habit he'd outgrown years ago, but one he'd quietly returned to lately. "You know," he said, "I used to think justice was something only judges and lawyers did. What do you think now?" she asked. "I think it's something we all do," he said. "Every time we say that's not right and mean it." She squeezed his hand. "Yeah," she said, "I think you're right." They turned the corner onto their street. Their building stood ahead, windows glowing with warm light. Home. Inside, the apartment was just as they'd left it, laundry in the basket, dishes in the sink, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. Ordinary, beautiful, theirs. She made tea. He put on a playlist of old soul music, something they'd both grown to love during the long nights of waiting. They didn't talk about the past much anymore. But they didn't have to. It was in the way they lingered at the dinner table, in the way he double-checked the locks before bed, in the way she never missed a school event no matter how tired she was. They'd been broken, yes, but they'd also been rebuilt, stronger in the places that mattered. And as the music played softly in the background, she looked at her son, really looked, and saw not just the boy who'd called the mayor, but the young man he was becoming, kind, thoughtful, unafraid to stand up for what's right. The phone might ring again tomorrow. There might be more calls from scared kids, more meetings, more work to do. The system wasn't fixed. Not completely, but it was bending slowly, stubbornly toward something fairer. And they'd be there, not as victims but as witnesses, not as bystanders but as participants, because justice wasn't a destination. It was a practice, a daily choice to show up, speak up, and care for each other. Outside, the city slept. But inside their small apartment, two hearts beat steady, full of quiet hope. And for now, that was enough.